So, what interactions made you realize you were on the autism spectrum?
In retrospect, I have some pretty good ones. When I was around 6 years old, my dad told me he needed a few sheets of toilet paper to clean some grease off of his hands. So I brought him back exactly 3 sheets separated exactly by the perforated line. When I brought them back to him, he asked if I could bring him a little bit less, so I promptly walked toward the bathroom until he stopped me. Another time, a couple of years later, my dad walked in from the garage while doing another greasy activity, and I stopped him to ask permission to use the microwave. Before I had the chance to, he showed me his hands and asked what I wanted. I explained that my friend and I would like 2 pepperoni pizza Hot Pockets. He then explained that he showed me his hands to demonstrate that he was working and couldn't handle food. Don't you know how to use the microwave? Granted, in this example, my dad was mainly just being a jerk. Another time while I was in the Navy, a supervisor was searching for a piece of test equipment for a maintenance check. I was just standing there, aloof and seemingly unconcerned, my default setting, and he asked me if I thought it would be a good idea to look for the test equipment in another space. I shook my head no because I assumed it was most likely to be found in that space we were in. He told me, or screamed at me, to get the F out of the space. I was just answering a question. What makes someone an incel other than having no relations with women, or vice versa? I technically could have been termed an incel at several points in my life, despite having an extensive dating history. I was traumatized by early experiences with the opposite sex, and never learned how to flirt or really connect on an emotional level. I was left a victim of chance, and my first relationships were based completely on opportunity because I was terrified of being weird or creepy because I had no idea how to prevent it. An abusive upbringing only made things more difficult. I have high-functioning autism, which was undiagnosed until I was 28, and it likely would have prevented me from dating in my young adult life were it not for sheer luck and the fact that I spent my 20s working in the US Navy, living in Japan, and traveling around Asia. My dating life was always characterized by bursts of glory, followed by months-long dry spells where I could barely find a date and would have to rely on the foreigner effect to attract women, or just hang out at bars outside the Navy base and invite women back to my apartment, which is quite creepy. In retrospect, online dating was also a lifesaver. Social media in general enabled me to interact with women without being thwarted by my awkwardness. The longest of my dry spells was when I moved to Tokyo after separating from the Navy. I had a nervous breakdown when I started at university and started attending therapy. I could barely even go in public without feeling lightheaded and was having almost daily panic attacks. I finally decided to get married and now live in the Philippines with my wife, as far away from my past as I could get. So ultimately, a lack of a support network for people can lead to anger and frustration, and that leads to anger and other unhealthy coping mechanisms. And it's a hard cycle to break out of, and it requires a lot of effort. What is the reason behind some autistic individuals, particularly those with Asperger's syndrome, appearing to lack empathy for others even though they may have been hurt by someone else? Now, this is a common misconception. We can feel effective empathy, but we have trouble understanding other people's feelings, cognitive empathy, which is the opposite of psychopathy. For example, when my wife talks to me about her dad and how much it hurt when he died, I can feel her pain to the point that I start crying, but I can't understand why she feels that way. It may appear that I'm unfeeling, but I simply have trouble expressing it or understanding someone else's pain. Bear in mind, people aren't exactly patient with me or other Aspies when we're feeling overwhelmed by our feelings. So is it not likely that we've taught ourselves to detach from things that bring more pain? I mean, hell, kids, the more psychopathically inclined ones, used to pick on me to the point of me crying just for fun, including my sister. Now I'm expected to be an empathetic sweetheart? I do my best, but you can't expect more than what you give. Is it possible for a neurotypical person to have a loving and caring relationship with someone who has Asperger's syndrome or autism? Of course, it's a trope in film and TV. It just takes 10 years longer than neurotypicals. That's not a literal statement, my fellow Aspies. Aspies and neurotypicals are good at balancing each other out. As with my wife, we came to the understanding I deal with technology and she deals with people. Aspies live at a slower pace than neurotypicals. We have the slow life plan, but we are the ones that achieve expertise. This isn't hot when you're 18, but it's pretty attractive when you're 30. And that's where the catch-up happens and the nerds take over. You may not have a lot of partners, but you'll have the right ones. Trust me, I've played both parts. You're not missing out on anything. Is it possible to live a normal life with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism? What are the advantages and disadvantages of having this condition in terms of education, career, and friendship? It can be an uphill battle, especially when you're undiagnosed and assumed to be arrogant, aloof, and lazy rather than shy, awkward, and sensitive. I bombed out of college after a semester at 18 in the ancient days of 2006 because universities overcomplicate the education process to the point of it having little to do with education at all. I lost all of my participation attendance points in my psychology class because the clicker I was required to use and pay for never successfully connected to the class's network, unbeknownst to me. I lacked all of the basic life skills necessary to function in this environment and ended up burning out in less than a semester. I joined the Navy at 19 to fix myself, barely made it through boot camp, passed my technical schools with little trouble, mostly, received horrible evaluations but still made it to E5 in less than 3 years because autism enabled me to focus on studying for 3 hours a day while my peers were too focused on watching movies and gaming. I was advancing, but I was going to eventually hit a brick wall at higher ranks once evaluations became the primary mover. As far as friendships, I found rejection amongst those I worked with. I work slow, I prefer working alone, I have trouble following vague instructions. The majority of working is actually bullshitting/socializing, but I made a ton of friendships amongst my fellow nubs at the bars outside the Navy base in Yokosuka, Japan, an environment where I can indulge in my main interest, talking endlessly about music and slobbering over the young Japanese ladies who weren't familiar enough with Americans to realize how awkward I was. So fast forward, I wrote a whole book about it. I have a pension from the Navy, I'm married to my wife in the Philippines, now I'm able to focus on my passions, writing, music, and video editing, etc., and now life is easy. I follow the Japanese of Ikigai, purpose, and Kaizen, constant improvement. Try to get to a point where you can focus your energies and forget everything else. This can take a lifetime to do.